Hi, everyone, and welcome to the On-Farm Dairy Processing series. Today, we are going to have our third and last session, and we are going to talk about managing the red tape for efficient and sustainable value-added dairy. To start, my name is Camila Lage, and I'm the dairy management specialist for the Southwest New York Dairy, Field Crop, and Livestock team. The Southwest team is a Cornell Cooperative Extension partnership between Cornell University and the CCE associations in 5 counties, including Allegheny, Cattaraugus, Chautauqua, Erie, and Steuben. Just before we start, just a housekeeping items. The webinar is being recorded, and so everyone but our speaker will be muted. And if you have any questions during the presentation, you can add them into the Q&A box, and we are going to be answering them by the end of the session. If someone else puts another question that you are also interested in, you can always put thumbs up, so we know that's a question that more than one person wanna have answered by the end of the presentation. We are also going to send a survey by the end of this presentation, and we would greatly appreciate if you can answer it. It really helps us get the feedback and improve for the next program. And our speaker today is Kimberly Bukowski. She's an extension support specialist with the Dairy Foods Extension for Cornell University. And so, Kim, if you are ready, you can share your screen.
All right. Can you guys see it okay?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, hi, I'm Kim Bukowski. I'm part of the Cornell Dairy Extension team that we're situated on campus. And we offer workshops for the industry and also do consulting. And one of my specialties is third-party auditing. And so I'm going to talk a little bit tonight about what the requirements are for that and how that plays into what your possible plans would be when you decide to grow your business on your farm. So if we start with the point that we're saying that you've been successful, you've watched the first 2 series of this program over the past couple weeks, and you've started your business on the farm, you're doing really great. And now you've been approached by one of the big grocery store chains, or possibly you have gone to them. And so when we talk about, the dream would be to put your product in Whole Foods or Wegmans. If it's a cheese product, maybe World's Best Cheese. And so when you get to that point and you start talking to one of those grocery store chains, the first thing they're going to ask is, have you had a third-party audit? And so you right away may be thinking to yourself, what are they talking about? What do I do? Where do I go? How do I pass, right? And so that's what I'm going to try to talk about tonight that can help you so that you would be ready for this. So first, let's talk about what an audit is. And basically, an audit is an independent examination of your system, right? So it's basically looking at what you have going on and then figuring out whether or not you're able to meet the criteria that they expect you to meet. So there are different types of audits. There's a first-party audit, which is considered an internal audit. So that would be one that you would do on yourself in your facility. And you would, go through your facility and figure out whether or not you have all the criteria that you need in order to pass the audit. A second-party audit would be a customer. So if, say, you want to supply Wegmans and Wegmans says, well, the only way you can supply product to us is you have to pass our Wegmans audit. They have auditors from their grocery store chain that will come to your facility and do the audit. And then the third-party audit is using an outside auditing company that you would have to hire, and they would certify that your facility meets whatever the customer's needs are. And we can get into more detail about that, but that's where GFSI audits come into play, like SQF, which stands for Safe Quality Foods, and other audits related to that. So the first thing you have to think about when you're getting ready to have an audit is, do you have a documented food safety program? And of course, we all want to make safe food, right? But is it documented, and does it describe exactly what you're doing in order to ensure that whatever product you're making is safe? And also, do you have standard operating procedures or work instructions for how you're making your product, how you're making sure that you're keeping it safe, and what that looks like? And then also records proving that you followed your own program. So an example would be, you could come up with instructions on how to clean a piece of equipment in your facility. So that would be your work instructions. And then you would have records where you would check off that that piece of equipment had been cleaned each time it got dirty and was used. And then was it inspected and reviewed before you went to make product on it again? So that's just, an example of what a work instruction might look like. So then the next step is, they're going to ask you, and I would ask you, my first question would be, do you have a hazard analysis critical control point plan, or we also call it HACCP for short? And if you've heard of it, that's great. If you haven't, you need to get yourself educated. And so the first step would be to take a course on it. At Cornell, we happen to have one online. You can also sign up. Different companies offer them. But it's really important because you can't pass an audit without one. And I like to think, when I talk about HACCP, it's basically the story of your business related to food safety and what products you're making, the description of those products. And I'll get into more detail as I go along. So basically, HACCP is a preventative and systematic approach to food safety, and that it focuses on the identification, evaluation, and control of the food safety hazards. And so we'll get into more detail as far as what that looks like. So what is HACCP? It's a food safety system. So you basically do a hazard analysis on your facility and your products that you're making. So you identify any potential hazards associated with the food. An example would be if you're going to be processing milk on the farm. Raw milk has hazards, right? I think earlier the second week, or maybe the first week, Rob talked about the hazards related to raw milk, and that, there's pathogens in the milk that could cause a problem. So then you identify what the hazard is, and then you identify what the critical control point would be to control that hazard. So in the case of raw milk, it would be pasteurized. So you may have a pasteurization system that is going to be your critical control point. So the pasteurization would be your time and your temperature that you're pasteurizing the milk to guarantee that you've killed the pathogens. And so why is the HACCP program necessary? Why are these grocery store chains requiring it? Basically to protect your food, and they want to protect their consumers. And they certainly don't want to have a recall. They don't want to sell a product that's going to make someone sick. So that's why they expect that you have this. Also, your customer demands it. Customers are a lot more involved in food now and understand the issues of food safety. So they're going to be asking for it and looking for it. And then you have to be able to supply it for an audit, and you have to prove that your HACCP program actually works. And then the third leg in this is the regulatory. Because of the Food Safety Modernization Act and also your state inspectors, they're going to be asking for your HACCP plan, and they're going to want to see that you have one and that you're using it properly. So the whole idea of HACCP is that it's a prevention versus a reaction. So we're going to identify what all the hazards are to your product before you ever start making it. And then hopefully that way, you won't ever have a problem with your product that you would have to make product that wasn't safe or didn't taste good or didn't work well. And so you wouldn't be reacting to an issue. Instead, you would be proactive on whatever problems there are. So when we talk about a HACCP plan, The preliminary steps start with assembling a HACCP team. Now, some of you may say, okay, I'm a team of one. I've got a farm. Maybe it's me and my husband, or me and my wife. And so there's two of us. Okay, well, that's a good team. And then you can also possibly, if you have any other employees that are working with you, if you've got, you can also hire an outside consultant, especially if you don't totally understand how to put the plan together in the beginning. So the team can be several people, or it could just be a couple people, but you don't want to do it completely by yourself, because the whole idea is to look for any hazards that are possible in your product. And if you're, and you might forget something, you might miss something. So doing it as a team is definitely recommended. The second step is to describe the food and its distribution. What are you making? What does it look like? What does it taste like? What are its chemical attributes, its biological attributes? And then how is it being distributed? Does it need to be refrigerated? Does it need to be frozen? And so you want to come up with a description of the food and the distribution. Also, you want to look at who's gonna be eating this food. If it's something that you're making for a population that may be immune compromised or the elderly, then you may treat the product a little bit differently, or how you're going to handle it. So you need to identify, or if you're making it for babies, then you want to identify that. The fourth step is to develop a flow diagram of your process. And this to me is the fun part. You basically start at the beginning in receiving, and you walk through your facility. You write down every piece of equipment, every process, all the way down out to shipping, and determine if each of those processes, if there's any hazards involved with that. And then you verify that flow diagram by walking through the facility with your flow diagram and making sure that you didn't forget anything. So when we talk about the principles of HACCP, we conduct our hazard analysis. And after we've done the hazard analysis, then we would identify any critical control points that we need to control. And at that point, we establish critical limits. So going back to using the example of pasteurizing milk, at that point, we would follow the pasteurized milk ordinance and what times and temperatures we would have to pasteurize at in order to kill all the pathogens that are in the milk. Then we have to come up with how we're going to monitor those critical control points, because it's fine to determine what they are, but if we're not monitoring them, then that's not doing us any good. And then establish corrective actions. And so the idea of establishing the corrective actions is that if we had a problem, say all of a sudden we didn't have any steam and we lost temperature, what would we do? What is the plan? You have to determine that ahead of time, because you don't want to be in the middle of a situation and then try and decide what you have to do. Then establish the verification procedures. Who's going to verify? Do you have records, what they look like? Your record keeping procedures, and those records are going to want to be, will be inspected by your state inspector. And also, if you have a third-party audit, that auditor will want to see those records. So historically, HACCP focuses on the process. We talked about your hazard analysis, your critical control points, your limits, your monitoring, and corrective action. Then FSMA, the Food Safety Modernization Act, was passed, and they have included preventive controls. So preventive controls is your regular HACCP plan, but then there's more preventive controls that have been added. So originally I was talking about critical control points related to processing, but some of the other preventive controls are allergens, sanitation, and supply chain controls. And those have been put into the system because those are things that also needed to be monitored with parameters and corrective actions, and then record keeping. So when we think of a preventive food safety system, we're talking about the food safety plan that I've just been talking about and the hazards involved with that. And then we come up with our different preventive controls, whether they're process controls, sanitation controls, allergens, or supply chain. We also add in a recall plan, and everyone should have a recall plan that has any type of hazard that they're controlling, because if they have an issue with their product, they want to be, they need to be able to recall it. It's also required by FSMA. And then you can add in your GMPs and other prerequisite programs, and we'll talk briefly about those. Looking at the chat. Okay, I'm just making sure no one has any questions so far. Okay. All right. So, the contents of a food safety plan, like I mentioned before, are the hazard analysis, and these are required by FSMA, your preventive controls, which I've outlined before, and the recall plan, and then any procedures for monitoring, corrective action, and verification. The other items, according to the Food Safety Modernization Act, are useful items, but also I feel you need to have for a good HACCP plan, as far as a description of your facility, who your team is, your product description, flow diagram, and any process descriptions that you would have. Every facility needs to have a preventive control qualified individual. So then you say, okay, what is that? That's a great title. And so what that is it's a person who assists with putting together the food safety plan. And it could be, one of your management staff, or it could be a person, that you hire like a consultant to help you. And the whole idea of what they do is they validate your preventive controls. They review the records of the of your preventive controls, determine any of the corrective actions, and also review the food safety plan anytime it needs to be updated or changed. So in order to be a preventive control qualified individual, you need to really understand what food safety plans are. There is a course that you can take. We offer it at Cornell. It's also offered by a lot of other food safety consulting companies. And it's been suggested that anybody who is going to put together a preventive control program for a food safety plan for a plant should have a preventive control person that understands how to do that. As far as having a recall plan, the things that are required by FDA are that you have a recall plan for any food with a hazard that requires a preventive control. You must provide a traceability of the product. So you have to be able to have lot numbers and code dates and be able to trace your product from the raw ingredients right away, all the way through to the finished product. The recall plan must be written, must be documented, and you must describe the steps that you would take and assign responsibility on who's going to notify your customers, who's going to notify the public, what that's going to look like. And then you need to do some effectiveness checks to make sure that you're able to trace your product and recall it back. And then also execute where you would dispose of any food that you would have to bring back that's being recalled. So in order to have a good recall plan, some of the common elements are a product withdrawal team, and you want to define the roles of everybody on the team and what their responsibilities are. You don't want to have to worry about in the middle of a recall, who's going to call who's going to do what, who's going to talk to the public. It's better if you sit down and you document ahead of time and practice who's going to do the different parts of the recall plan. You need an up-to-date contact list for all your external notifications. So that would basically be your regulators, your customers. And then how are you going to notify the public? Are you going to put it on your website? Are you going to do a radio ad? Are you going to make phone calls? There's a lot of different ways that you can reach the public. I've also seen some companies even use Facebook, their Facebook page to notify the public if there's a certain lot number that needs recalling. And then we have lot identification and verification information. So how are you identifying your product? What's your lot code, and how do you determine, is it easy to be able to post that and people would understand what the lot code is? And then you want to do effectiveness checks to see that every part of your recall works, how you're going to dispose of the product. And then also you need to identify if there's a warehouse where you may have to put your product. One of years ago, when there was a recall on edible dog chew toys coming from China, I went to do an audit in a plant where they were making dog food. And we walked into this one warehouse and it was completely full with these dog chew toys that had come over from China. And they were being recalled. And so they were sitting in this warehouse that FDA had told them they couldn't ship the product. And so they literally had to rent an extra warehouse just to handle this product. And it was something that they hadn't thought about ahead of time. So they really had to hurry up and try to get a place where they could put the product until FDA could determine if it was safe for them to sell. When we talk about corrective actions related to recalls, once we have a recall and there's any issues and we figure out what the problem was, then we want to go back and look at our food safety plan and see if there's anything that needs to be changed. You know, it may result in a modification of the food safety plan. It may mean that we have to retrain our employees. Maybe, you know, they weren't doing something right, or other actions to prevent this from happening again. Also maintaining a log of the decisions that were made throughout the recall. When I go to do an audit, the first thing that I ask when it comes to the recall portion of the audit, I'll say, have you had a recall or withdrawal in the past year? And if a facility has had one, then I ask to see their documentation. And I can guarantee that most of the time it's a good, you know, 1 to 2 or 3 inches thick of all the paperwork, all the documentation of doing the recall. And so you have to maintain all those records because FDA may require them too. And then after the recall is completed, you want to conduct a review meeting with your staff and make sure that you've covered all your bases as far as what could be the problem. And one of the things that people will always say, well, we do everything right, you know, we'll never have a recall. Well, I hate to say it, but sometimes it's not even your fault. It could be packaging that you buy from someone or an ingredient that you bought from someone else, and then you used it in your product. And if there's a problem with that ingredient, even though you've done everything you can in your facility, you still may end up with a recall. So you have to be prepared. So as far as a food safety plan overview, you want to have a written food safety plan specific to your facility. And that's the other thing. Like I've had small facilities say, well, you know, can I just cut and paste and use someone else's? And I always say, we can give you templates that you can fill out, but it's got to be specific to your facility. Then you identify the hazards requiring the preventive controls and identify what those are. And then also identify your, you know, if you have any food allergens, sanitation, supply chain, have a recall plan written up. And then the implementation procedures as far as any validation studies, monitoring, corrective actions, and any verification procedures you would want to identify. The other piece to a food safety system is good manufacturing practices. And those are guidelines that are issued by the federal government that must be observed and adapted for a facility manufacturing food. The components of good manufacturing practices can be found in the 21 CFR 117 subpart B, and you can go on the internet and go to that, and they are listed there. But you want to then take those good manufacturing practices and use the basics of that to put together your own personal GMPs for your facility. And this is where you would address any personnel issues like hairnets and uniforms and special shoes and no jewelry. Plant and grounds, you know, is it clean around the outside of your building? Is the inside of the plant clean? Any sanitary operations as far as, you know, how are you keeping your operation clean? Sanitary facilities and controls. Equipment and utensils, are they designed for manufacturing? Are they safe to be using to produce your product? Generally stainless steel, those types of things. Warehousing and distribution, and then any defect action levels where you would say, okay, there's a problem with my product and this is what I have to do to address it. So when we ask the question, why are GMPs necessary? Basically, they're the foundation of your food safety system. It helps extend the storage life of your products. It reduces any risk of process or product suspension on sanitary grounds. It reduces the risk of product being involved in a foodborne illness outbreak. You know, if you, it's a way for you to control that there won't be a problem. You have less need to reprocess product. Also, product capable of meeting government and commercial microbial specifications. So you need to have good manufacturing practices in place for that. And then you have fewer product rejects, returns, or complaints. Once again, you want to be proactive instead of reactive to any problems that could happen while you're producing the food. Then the most important thing at the end of the day is you need to train everyone. You need to train yourself. You need to train your employees. So in order to train your employees, you also need to be qualified by education or training or experience on how to manufacture and process the food that you're going to make. And there's lots of training available, but the individuals must receive, you know, food hygiene and food safety training. And the supervisors that are responsible for ensuring compliance must have appropriate education and training too. The Institute for Food Safety at Cornell has an online GMP training. I put the link here in my slides. And that's one place where you could start for yourself and also for your employees if you feel you need to have more GMP training to understand what your requirements are for your facility. Then we also have prerequisite programs. So when I talked earlier about your food safety program, you can't have a good food safety program if you don't have the foundation for these different programs. And so the idea is to have these prerequisite programs in place to support the HACCP plan. So in other words, a food safety plan isn't any good if you had bad water. So you have to have a good water supply. So you need to have a prerequisite program that addresses, do you have city water or well water? Are you having it tested? Do you have vacuum breakers on your water lines so that the water doesn't become contaminated in your facility? You need to have a good cleaning and sanitation program. If you're not cleaning your equipment well, then you could get into trouble very quickly. So that's a very important prerequisite program. Another basic prerequisite program is the prevention from cross-contamination. And, you know, what are examples of that? Well, you wouldn't want to use your product container to store nuts and bolts in for fear that they could get into your product. And protection from adulteration, you don't want to have issues with raw versus pasteurized product or allergens versus non-allergen products. So you have to have procedures in place that protect your product from that. Personal hygiene and welfare. You don't need anyone working in your facility who's sick and who could possibly contaminate the food. Hand washing is very important. So you want to have a good prerequisite program in place where all your employees understand that they wash their hands every time they walk into the facility, anytime they leave a bathroom or have anything to eat, anytime their hands get dirty, and that you have hand washing sinks where they're available for your employees that have the right soap and water and all those types of things. We have labeling, storage of toxic compounds. So any cleaning supplies, anything that's in a container that it's labeled properly. And then you also need to have a pest control program. You certainly don't need to have any pests get into your product. So these are all foundational prerequisite programs that you need in order to support your HACCP plan. There's plenty of other prerequisite programs that are important for your operation, starting with approved suppliers. So when you're getting ingredients in, making sure that the ingredients that you're using come from a company that also has a HACCP plan and also can guarantee that the product is safe. Some of the other ones listed here, having product specifications, a consumer complaint program is very important. A lot of times you don't even know you have a problem until the consumer complains. So if you need to have a program in place where you can take those complaints in, investigate it, possibly have to put product on hold and figure out what's going on. And then if you have product that has an issue, then that's considered non-conforming product. How do you put it on hold? Who can take it off of hold? Where is it stored so it doesn't accidentally get shipped out? Product release is an important prerequisite program. Who determines that the product is ready to go to the customer? Has it passed all the biological and chemical criteria so that you know your product is ready to go? Have you done sensory on it? Does it taste right before you let it go? We talked a little bit about an allergen program. Allergens are the #1 cause for recalls, and mostly because of labeling. So do you have a program in place where all your labels are reviewed and made sure that they follow any of the allergens that could possibly be in your product, that those are labeled? Environmental monitoring is important for making sure that you don't have anything in your environment that could contaminate your product. Calibration of your equipment, preventative maintenance, food defense. These are all programs that you need to think about if you're going to be manufacturing food. I know this list is pretty overwhelming, but it doesn't have to be huge programs. It just has to be you determining that you've thought about it. Is there any hazards? How you're going to control them, and then document what you're thinking you're going to do. Internal audits is something that you'd want to do yourself so that you can walk through your facility every day and make sure that there isn't any issues before you start manufacturing. And I've already talked about the recall program. So you're probably right now feeling very overwhelmed with all the stuff that I've started with. So I guess the question is, where do I start in this audit journey so that I'm ready? So your first step I would suggest is to schedule a GMP audit with a certified auditing body. And there's several companies out there that offer these. And that will get you started on determining whether or not you could pass a even bigger audit like SQF or BRC or something related to the Global Food Safety Initiative that some of the stores require. So the second step would be to prepare for that audit, and possibly part of that preparing would be to have a gap audit, and that's something that we offer from Cornell. So you could have someone come in and walk through your programs and see what pieces you're missing, and then get audited, and then have corrective actions where you can fix anything that was found. And then that way you can go to the grocery store chains and say, you know, you're ready to supply them product. So when we talk about documentation, there's a ton of documentation related to all of these food safety systems. But basically, you want to start with what your policies are. What's your policy for allergens? What's your policy for sanitation? Then you have your specific programs that you would identify, and you would write down what those look like. Then your procedures, so your standard operating procedures on how you make your product, how you clean your equipment, those types of things. And then any records or training that shows that you've actually done what is expected in your program. So when I put this slide in as far as where to go for help. So in order to pass a third-party audit, you'll need to document your food safety plan, your prerequisite programs. And so we have some great links on our website. So this link here is for our dairy extension website, and under food safety programs, we've got some templates. We also have courses that we offer that can help you get ready for your audit. So I've also put our website address in here. And we also offer a dairy science and sanitation course, which is online and self-paced. And so that helps if you're looking to produce a dairy product on the farm and you want to get up to speed on what you need to be worried about. And then we also offer the online HACCP training that you can do at your own pace. And I put that link here. But if you go to Cornell Dairy Extension and go to our calendar, you can see the different courses that we offer. And then another useful link as you grow, you may want to get traceability software. And I've been told by several small artisans that this Tamlin software works well for traceability. So I just thought I would put that link in here too. So now we're just, Rob, my coworker, is going to join me right now to talk about examples of some roads to success or not. And so the first example I'm going to put up for Rob. Rob, you there?
I am.
Okay.
I was just thinking I might leave you hanging, or maybe not. But I won't. I'll jump in here.
Thank you.
So this is experience talking. So this is a perfect example of someone who put all of their eggs in one basket. So they wanted to get into one of the big large chains, and they made a contract agreement with a large grocery chain. So they were successful there. So they started making, this was a cheese plant, by the way. They started making cheese like crazy. They filled their aging cave with this wonderful cheese. The chain highlighted local artisans and made a large order to supply all their stores. And this is, at the time, was a chain that had about 70, 75 stores at the time. They've since gotten larger. But they wanted to highlight this artisan and some other artisans that were involved. And so that's what they were kind of focused on. And this was like during the summertime. So the cheese didn't sell so well, and the price point from the artisan was too high. So the large grocery chains are an outlet, but you're not going to get rich quick, meaning everybody plays the lottery, but not everybody wins the lottery. So when you're starting to set price points and thinking about those types of things, the grocery chain is going to want to make money too. And they're probably getting hundreds, if not thousands, of vendors that are bringing products to them. And so if your product doesn't sell, they're probably not going to buy much more of it, especially if it's at a price point that they can't sell it at, because they're going to want to make a profit as well. So these are things that you have to think about. And this goes back to some of the marketing that I think we got in week one. And so the orders from this grocery chain for this person or this company dwindled because the product wasn't moving, obviously. And so here now the cheesemaker made this great big huge cave full of cheese, and now it's not moving anywhere. But this cheese company didn't have any other outlets for their cheese, because they basically were looking at one grocery chain as their source of income and their source or their direction of moving all their cheese. So there are pitfalls to that. And you just need to think about those things as you go forward and you start getting involved with some of the larger chains. Next slide, Miss Kim.
Yeah.
All righty. This is another good one. So this was a cheesemaker making cheese in a small plant. It had no real food safety plan in place, and a plant that was attached to the barn. And we all know that barns and food processing don't necessarily always go really well together for obvious reasons. So they started doing little pieces of food safety, but didn't really have a plan in place. And then they started testing the environment for listeria. Well, they found listeria in the plant, but they didn't have any real plan to attack it. And so there was no root cause analysis to figure out where it was coming from, why it was there. And they didn't really focus on trying to get rid of it. Well, when you have it in the plant, it's eventually going to make its way into the cheese. And listeria, being a zero tolerance pathogen, made its way onto the retail shelves, and the FDA showed up because they found it on a retail shelf. And things never go pretty when the regulators show up to tell you that they found something that was in commerce already. By the time this was all over, the recall forced the closure of the plant by the FDA until satisfactory results showed that the listeria problem had been taken care of. And that plant is still closed and has since completely folded. So food safety is not something you can overlook. The point of Kim's talk, for the most part, is food safety is what these giant chains are actually looking for. And that's what these audits are well, mostly about. Next slide, Ms. Kim.
Yeah. So Rob was the bad news bear.
I'm the bad news bear.
told two bad examples. And I wanted to tell a success story. So there was a small company that we've worked with here in New York State that was making great cheese products, and they got a shot to go with a large retailer. And of course, the first thing the retailer wanted was an audit from them. And the retailer said, that they wanted them to start with just a GMP audit. So when we say a GMP audit, basically a good manufacturing practices audit. And so they worked really hard preparing for this audit. Then they had an auditor come in and they passed their GMP audit. So they started supplying the customer with the promise to eventually get SQF certified, which is the Safe Quality Foods certification, which is a lot bigger than even a GMP audit, and it's a lot more work. It's a longer audit. So they prepared for the SQF audit and they ended up passing the audit. And by keeping the retailer happy and increasing sales and making a safe product, they were able to increase their production, and eventually they moved into a new and bigger facility and are still doing business with now more than one retailer. So they started out very small, and through working really hard and making sure that they kept food safety right in front of them as far as what they were making, it's a success story, and still is to this day. So it can be done. So I don't want you to feel like you're not able to make it, because you can, but you just have to, like Rob and I said, keep food safety in mind as you put your program together of what you're going to do. So at this point, I pretty much covered what I was going to cover, and I was hoping, maybe we have some questions. I don't know.
Thank you very much, Kim. Let me just double check the Q&A box here. It seems that people don't really like the legislation part. But we have like some questions coming now, and the first one is saying, how long does a typical audit take?
Oh, that's a very good question. For a small supplier, it takes at least a day, sometimes 2 days, but generally your first audit would probably take a day. Yeah.
So the first one would take a day, and then how often after that they use?
How often? Okay, so if you pass the audit, you need to get the audit once a year.
Once a year.
And
it's dependable
if
on
you don't
like,
pass the audit, then generally you might have to have a re-audit. And so then there might be more audits involved.
And is that like dependent on the type of product you are, doing it on your facility, or it will be, the same for any type of product, like bottled milk or ice cream, for example? Is there a difference?
As far as how long the audit would be?
Yes.
Yeah. It's based on the size. So if you're
Okay.
small and you're just starting out, I would say the audit would be 1 day. And you definitely have to get the audit done annually.
And generally, these audits are at the expense of the processor, not the company that wants you to get audited.
Yeah, that is correct. And so a GMP audit is cheaper than an SQF audit. So a GMP audit would take 1 day. An SQF audit, generally for a small operation, is 2 days or 2.5 days. And so they charge by the day. So a GMP audit, last I heard, is about $1,700. And an SQF audit at a minimum is probably $3,000 to $5,000 for a small operation. They're not cheap.
No, you're not.
No.
I got surprised on how much it costs. Yep.
Yeah.
We have another one here. should I get third-party audit certifications before going to a buyer or wait until I find interested buyers?
I would have a food safety plan started, like I would develop your HACCP plan and your prerequisite programs, have those started. And then you can go to the retailers that you think you want to supply and then find out what their requirements are. Because every retailer is a little bit different. Yeah.
Okay, so depending on the retailer, you
Right.
have like different levels of
Right, exactly.
okay.
Exactly, yeah. I think Rob and we'd seen, as far as retailers go, Whole Foods was always a little easier than, say, Wegmans, as far as what the requirements are. But just recently I heard they've now changed so that they're getting tougher. As far as expecting, a bigger, more certified audit.
Okay. How do I get in touch with the different auditors? Like how do they?
So what you want to do is you want to contact auditing firms. There's firms that offer it. Eagle is one, Merrihew is another one. So yeah, there's several. You can go to SQFI's website and there's a list on their website of the different certification bodies. And then they are the ones that have the checklist, hire the auditors, make sure they're qualified to audit whatever product you're making, so that you have the right audit.
So the first step is just accessing this website and seeing in which category you would be.
Yeah. Yes.
If I sell direct to my customers, are there any audit requirements? If like they have, let's see, store at their own farm and.
So like if you decided to sell your product online or like at a farmer's market or something, or off your farm, no, there's no audit requirements for that. You just have to pass your state inspection.
Okay.
Yeah. And be licensed with the state. Yeah.
Okay. Let me see.
The reason why the grocery store chains are requiring a certified audit, I don't think I really explained that well, but it's a way for them to determine whether or not you have a food safety plan, but also it's a way for them to compare you to everybody else. And so you're all being asked the same questions, you're all being inspected against the same checklist. So it helps with consistency.
Okay. And I see another question here. Do you see more third-party audits or in-house audits required by buyers?
As far as I know, every grocery store chain requires some kind of audit. I don't know of any that don't require something, some type of audit, or they themselves may audit you. I know Wegmans has several auditors that work for them. And so they will give you, a lot of times what Wegmans will do is if they want to carry your product, they'll give you the choice. You can either use their in-house auditors, which won't cost you anything because they're paying for that auditor, or they'll tell you they want you to get a certified audit. So I know small farmstead operations. I know one for a fact that said, I'll take the Wegmans auditor, I'll do that. And even Rob, I think at the Cornell in his plant, he had Wegmans audit him. Where then there's other ones that say, well, I don't know if I want to take my chances with the Wegmans auditor. What if they're really tough?
That's what I was gonna ask.
I'll go with a certified auditing company. Truthfully, I think toughness wise, they're about the same. And if Wegmans is going to offer you, like I say, their auditor, it's not going to cost you. I don't think Wegmans charges for that. You might want to, go that direction. I don't know. Rob, would you agree that it worked out okay for you to do that, right?
Yeah, I mean, they're basically using kind of the same criteria anyway. What
Yeah.
you'll find is, you know, if you get an SQF audit or GFSI audit, sometimes you'll have other companies that come in and say, all right, we'll accept your SQF, but we also have an addendum to that. Like Walmart does that, for example, where they've added some other requirements on top of SQF. Other than that, I think they're all pretty much the same.
Yeah. Yeah. And Rob brought up a good point, that if you go with a certified audit from a company that does auditing, then you can give that to every single one of your retailers. Where if you choose to just go with Wegmans, if you're only going to supply Wegmans, that's fine. But then you got to turn around and have to pay for an audit anyways, if you want to do other stores, you know, other companies. Yeah.
Okay, so if you are planning on selling to different people, so it's
Yeah.
better to get one instead of like
Exactly.
having two people. Yeah,
Yeah,
makes sense.
I agree
But
with
if
that.
you like have a smaller and you decide to sell everything to like Wegmans or other ones that have their own audit, it may save you money to go with their audit.
Correct.
Yes,
Right.
I get it. Yeah, I think if anyone have any other question, please drop them in the chat or on the Q&A. And I think as far as the ones I'm seeing here, we addressed all of that. Thank you very much. I think, you know, the Q&A questions session helped a lot with some questions I had.
Yeah.
So yeah, I appreciate Rob and King and Anika and Caitlin that made this series very good and helped a lot of farmers get an idea on what it takes to start their own, you know, on-farm processing. And we are, as I said in the beginning, we are recording this session and we are gonna send the material and the recording after that, so you can revisit it and, you know, look at the information again as you need. And I appreciate all of you guys that came all the 3 weeks and stayed here with us, and appreciate all our speakers. And with that, we are wrapping up our session, and I would like to thank you, everyone. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email any of us. You probably will find it in the material. And yeah, that's it. Thank you very much and have a great rest of your week.